Okay, so this is part of a series of webinars that I've been given over quite a while. This one, and they're meant to be for the non-scientists. I hope you feel that at the end. This one is about what do MRI and CT scans tell you. Because I just want to introduce magnetism and magnetic fields, because a lot of the talk is going to be about magnetic fields. That's what MRI runs on. So I'm going to start off with magnetism and magnetic fields. I'm sure you're familiar with having a compass that measures the direction of the Earth's magnetic field. Magnetic fields have direction. And you're probably pretty familiar with this sort of thing, a nice magnet that we'll use to pick up the paper clips that I've lost. That also has a magnetic field running from one pole to the other. But the main part of this talk concerns magnetic fields generated by coils. So here's a wire, and if I coil it into a coil like this, and if I pass a current through it, then there's a magnetic field going in and out from the coil. And if I make it be lots of coils, if I can do that, then I increase the strength of the field by the number of coils I've got. I pass the current through, the magnetic field goes in and out of the coil. And it's got direction, so here it's going in and out of my screen, there it's going up and down, there it's going side to side. So by orientating the coils, I can change the direction of the magnetic field. Now, the talk was about computerized tomography and magnetic resonance imaging, but it's going to be almost entirely about magnetic resonance imaging. CT works with X-rays. You do X-ray scans of the brain, quite a lot of them. That is ionizing radiation. It's low risk because it's a lowish form of radiation and you don't experience it for very long. It's cheaper and faster than MRI, so in emergencies you will have a CT scan probably, but it's lower resolution than MRI, and it doesn't image cavernoma anything like as well, so it's not a good way of understanding cavernoma. But MRI, magnetic resonance imaging, works by having magnetic fields. We just talked about magnetic fields and coils, and you also have electromagnetic radiation. That's radio waves. They're not ionizing, so they're safe. And so MRI is a safe technology. It's slow. Most of you have probably had MRIs, 20 to 50 minutes for a scan. It's very noisy, can be claustrophobic. On the other hand, there are many different modes. We shall talk about some of those modes, and they're very important because they will enable you to do different things and see different things about cavernoma. And it has the advantage over CT because it can detect flowing blood and cryptic hidden vascular malformations. And of course, a cavernoma is a vascular malformation. Disadvantage, if you have a pacemaker, if you have metal implants, metal chips, anywhere, you can't be scanned with MRI because the magnetic field will take those and drag them into the big magnet you've got, and that's rather dangerous if it's in the middle of your body. So here's a CT scan. It's got rather low density, it's got rather low resolution compared to an MRI, and we'll talk about those a bit more. That's just to show the difference. So the talk, webinar, whatever, is in two parts. The first part is how MRI works, and I'm going to be talking about the machinery a bit, and also about the way that tissues and bodies, cavernoma particularly, of course, work in an MRI. Then the second part is going to be talking about MRI and cavernoma, and I decided it would be fun to talk about how an MRI scanner works. So that's an MRI scanner. You've probably been in one, most of you, and it's got a table which you lie on, head at one end normally, and that drags you, or it's taking you into the middle of the MRI scanner, which is a torus kind of thing with a big hole down the middle, as I'm sure you know. And here's a young girl about to be put into the MRI scanner, just waiting for her MRI scan. Now, I'm going to draw an analogy with magnetic resonance with fluorescence. They're not the same in many ways, but the general principle is pretty similar. Because if you have I mean, here is me set up ready for my bicycle with two fluorescent markers here to make sure that the cars miss me at night, then they are illuminated by the car headlights and they fluoresce, in this case with a yellow color. And the fluorescence is the light emitted. The light knocks an electron out of a fluorophore, the car light or whatever, but then when it's been knocked out, it jumps back in again, and the fluorescence is the light signal that you get coming back. So you knock it out and it comes back again with a characteristic light, which you can measure. Magnetic resonance, on the other hand, works with protons, and protons are hydrogen nuclei. And so you get a lot of them, of course, in water. Water is very present in the brain as elsewhere. You get a lot of hydrogen nuclei atoms in fat and so on, and of course in most biological tissues. So what you're doing when you do magnetic resonance is you're looking at how the protons are behaving. Now, protons have what is called spin. And think of a spinning top, for the sake of argument. A spinning top works in a particular direction. You can say that it's up or down, and a proton has a spin with a direction. Now, if you apply a magnetic field, the spins all line up. They don't line up at the level of field that the Earth has, but the level of field that the magnetic resonance imager has will certainly line them up. And you can perturb that magnetic field, and I'll tell you about that in a moment, and then the spin changes direction. And if you perturb it just for a little while, like a few milliseconds or something, then the perturbation goes off. The spin will change direction when you put it on, and it will change direction back again when you switch it off. And it's that switching off that gives off the radio waves which you detect. So the detector in MRI are the radio waves you get after you've perturbed the spin of the protons with magnetic fields. So back to the scanner. Here's the scanner, and we've talked about the person sitting on here, and here's the torus, and I'm going to talk about the innards of that just a little bit, because it's really quite interesting how it works. So what you have in no magnetic field is the protons. So this is of the body. I didn't have a slide of the protons in a cavernoma, but you have to imagine the cavernoma up here somewhere, and its protons are random in orientation as they are in the body as a whole. Now, if you go into the scanner and you then have a large magnetic field put on by the main magnet, as I'll show you in a minute, then the spins all line up in the direction of the main magnet. And here is the structure inside a scanner. The main magnet is a massive coil. That's this white thing here. It's a circular coil, like I showed you earlier. It's got many thousands of turns. It runs all the way along the length of the MRI, and it takes a large current, and it generates a very large magnetic field. It's a very strong magnet, and it's cooled by liquid nitrogen, and we'll see in a moment that it's switched on and off during the time course you have an MRI. There's a lot of energy there. When you switch it on, it makes a big bang. When you switch it off, it goes a big bang. And those of you who've been in an MRI scanner know it goes ba 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 ba, and it's the pain of your life for 20 minutes. But the reason why is that you're switching off very high energy magnets. So that's the main magnet. Now, you have perturbations I talked about, and those perturbations are produced by magnetic coils. And those magnetic coils are, here's one of them in orange, here's another one of them in yellow, another one of them yellow, another one here in blue, and they are at right angles to each other. And so the magnetic fields from these red ones, well, that's red, go through in and out. The ones from the blue ones go in that direction, and the ones in the other, what colour's the other one? The yellow ones go up and down. So you can do perturbations of the spin that you've got horizontal here which you can vary as you wish to. And that gives you a lot of ability to modify the way or modify what you're looking at. And everything is detected by this orangey red coil here, because you detect radio waves going through a coil as well. And so you can see that we've got a massive number of coils in the MRI scanner. And the reason for the noise I mentioned is the large amount of, oops, sorry, what did I do there? Fiddle. Not sure what I've done there.
Take out your video.
I'm going to go back again and start again. I forgot how I did that. Just
excellent. Then we can look at other people.
Yeah, you don't like to.
Are we okay?
Is my mother out then? How
Yeah.
dare she
I'm sorry?
do that?
No.
No.
Am I back on?
Outrageous.
Mate, he doesn't know how to work anything.
No, yes, you're back on, David, now.
Okay. And so what you've got then is these protons, which are spinning here horizontally. When you turn this magnetic coil off, they realign, and the radio waves that they generate when they realign, going back from this orientation to this orientation, that is of the big magnetic field, that dies off with time over quite a short time, and that's the thing that is detected and measures the image that you get of the brain. So this is the last of these sort of slides. Here's the big coil that runs circular. This is the big circular coil that forms the torus here. These are the coils that are the perturbation coils that aren't shown in this diagram here. I've described those. That's the general nature of the scanner. So that's part one. And that is meant to give you some kind of feel for what goes on inside a scanner and why it's so claustrophobic. It has to be sort of reasonably small to get the high field, and why it makes such a noise. Okay, so MRI and Cavernoma. What you get when you have done an MRI scan is an image of the brain in the computer. So here is the brain. It's a three-dimensional image held in the computer of your brain. But you don't look at the three-dimensional image. You look at what do they call sections, and the sections can be in one of three main directions. They can be where you look at it from the side, where you can look at it from below, because it's always looked at from below. And this is what are most of the MRI scans that you see. And you can look at it with the eyes at the front. So you're looking at it in a longitudinal section. You can see three different types of section that you can get for an MRI. And if we just think about these actual ones, as the normal ones you see, they can be at any different level, from this level to this level to this level, all the way down, many thousands of sections you can see. And the radiographer will choose and will go up and down in sections to find the cavernoma in the image. Now, I'm sorry, there are no cavernomas in this image. In these images here, I couldn't find one that was like that. There'll be cavernomas coming up shortly, but that's the way in which you get the images. Having got the structure of the whole brain in the computer, you can then play around with it. You can expand it, you can look at different section levels. You've got a great deal of versatility about what you see. Now, there are different modes of MRI scan. There are many different modes. I'm only going to be talking about 4 today, which are the main ones that you will come across. They are called T1, T2, susceptibility weighted image, or SWI, and you won't often come across permeability, but I just like to mention permeability scans at the end. So let's start with T1 and T2. T1 and T2 you get the type of scans that you see here, and apologies again for lack of cavernoma. Getting illustrations like this, I didn't find a comparable pair with cavernoma, and we will come to cavernoma. But the point about T1 and T2 is that you get different appearances of what the brain looks like and what the cavernoma looks like as well. The most obvious thing is that the cerebrospinal fluid is white in T2 weighted, in T2, and is black in T1. Now, white is a high intensity. The hydrogen is giving a lot of signal there. It's not giving the same sort of signal over in T1. Now, the brain has got grey matter and white matter. The grey matter is this stuff around the outside. It's connected via white matter, which are the axons, which can go down to the body. They can go across to other parts of the grey matter over here. And the images of white matter are light in T1, that's this down this region, and they're dark in T2. The cortex, that's this bit round the outside, is white in T1 and it's dark in T2. And fat and other tissues are bright, they're different. And in particular, down at the bottom, inflammation, because cavernoma are an inflammation, are dark in T1 and dark in T2. And I'm sorry not to have that on that image at the moment. But the point to make is that they give different images to each other. For those of you with spinal cavernoma, this is a comparable picture of the spine. So the cerebral spinal fluid is white in T2 and it's black, dark in T1, and the same sort of things for the spinal cord and so on. The discs appear grey in T1, but they appear bright in T2. The point I'm trying to make is that different parts, different types of tissue give very different appearances, and they give different appearances in different modes of MRI scans. So we come to some cavernoma at last. So here's a T1 image. I'll come to what contrast is in a moment. And here is a cavernoma in T1. Here is a cavernoma in T2. They've got rather different structures. And here, susceptibility weighted image is used most often for people who have familial cavernoma and many cavernoma. So this one's got many cavernoma all over the place. I'm not going to start trying to put them all in, but this is a very good way of measuring the number of cavernoma you have if you have familial cavernoma. Somewhere I've lost a bit of paper I should have needed. I can't think what the hell I did with it. This one you wrote out for me just now, Pat, never mind. Now, the point here is that the T1 is very useful for assessing subacute blood, as that's the blood that's there the whole time, as in cavernoma. It doesn't matter particularly what the thing was. T2 has got this reticulated appearance like the raspberry that you see, and here it's for measuring the lesions in the, particularly used for people with familial cavernoma. Now, here's 3 more scans. Now, this is with contrast, this is without contrast. Contrast I'll come to in a moment. Doesn't really matter too much. In this image, here's the cavernoma, little thing here. In this one, here's the cavernoma. And in this one, actually, the cavernoma is red arrow somewhere here. And the point I want to make here is that you, again, get different types of image with the someone to admit, Pat, I think, different type of image with T1 and T2, and I'll talk about contrast in a moment. This particular image is interesting because the normal magnetic field you get in hospital magnets, in hospital MRI, is either 1.5 or 3 Tesla. Tesla is the unit of magnetic field. In research labs, they're now getting much more powerful magnets, and the point about the more power is you get greater resolution. And so here you see all the blood vessels of what's called a developmental venous anomaly, which is often associated with cavernoma. And that's not really part of this talk, but you can see the very fine structure of the blood vessels with a very high powerful magnet that you get in SWI. Now, this slide I've shown to make one particular point. There are cavernoma in each of these images. Here it is in this one, blown up over on the right. Here it is in this one, blown up on the right. This one is down here, rather small one, blown up on the right. And here's an image with lots of cavernoma from someone with familial cavernoma, was similar-ish to what I saw. Now, I don't know whether these were T1 or T2. The point I want to make with this slide, and this comes out of a paper by somebody called Kelly Fleming, which is on the Cavernoma Alliance website, is that if you have a cavernoma and an image of your cavernoma, it won't have the same properties as somebody next to you with a cavernoma. Different cavernoma have different properties. Some of them have bled recently and showed signals that are due to that. Some of them haven't, and they can be of different sizes. There's lots of reasons why different people's cavernoma are different to each other, and they show up on MRI scans differently. And they've been typed into 4 different types, 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'm not going to go through the different details here. The point I'm wanting to make is that if you've got a cavernoma on your own MRI, don't go along to somebody else and say, hey, why is yours different? It's different because their cavernoma is different, genuinely so. But there are, on the whole, 4 types of cavernoma, 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'd just like to, for the technically minded, just tell you something about the difference between T1 and T2. This is basically the image you saw earlier, where you have the random protons when you don't have a magnetic field. When you switch the main magnet on, they're all orientated along the line of that magnetic field, which of course is horizontal, so they tend to be up and down along your body if you're lying flat in an MRI scanner. And then if you perturb them with those extra coils, then they can change direction. Here they're showing as horizontal, but they don't need to be horizontal. They can be any different direction that you, the experimenter, want to see by varying the current in those perturbation, those magnetic coils I showed you. But then if you do this with a pulse, quick on, quick off, you orientate these into whatever direction they're going to be orientated. When they switch off, then they realign back to this orientation here and you measure that through the receiver coils. You're measuring this realignment in the situation. That's true for both T1 and for T2. But the difference is as follows. In T1, you make the interval. If you're going to have pulses, as you would have here, or indeed you get pulses in the main field, but I'm not going to talk about the difference there. If you have pulses that are fairly quickly together, these protons can relax, they can realign, but they only get as far as realigning to the main magnet. But if you have but T2 is if you leave the gap to be longer, then they realign, and especially if you have this field off as you happen, that's the Big Bang, then they realign to be random again. So T1 is a short interval. They don't have time to fully relax to the unaligned. They only can align this far. And T1 and T2 are basically differences in the time interval between switching the perturbation off and making the measurement. So, contrast. I suspect many of you have had an MRI scan where you've had gadolinium injected into your blood somewhere, and then you wait for it to disperse around the body into the brain and into the cavernoma. So here are 2 images taken, first of all, before the injection of cavernoma. Here's the cavernoma here. Here's the cavernoma after the injection of gadolinium, and you can see that the intensity has changed dramatically. And this means that the injection of gadolinium enables you to see more details about the cavernoma than you can otherwise. And gadolinium is particularly useful at looking at cavernomas, vascular structures, cavernoma, and breakdown in the blood-brain barrier. And those of you who've been to earlier ones of the webinars I've talked about know that a big important difference between the cells of the blood capillary cell wall between people without cavernoma and people with is that the cells of the cell wall of the blood capillaries are held together by tight junctions, and that if you then have a cavernoma where you have a cavernoma, those tight junctions are lost, and that's the breakdown of the blood-brain barrier. So the reason for using gadolinium, particularly if you're thinking you've got a cavernoma, is because you see the cavernoma that much better. I mean, it's an odd-looking cavernoma, but tough. So that is the basis of the talk as far as the main part is concerned. I'm not talking about what you have individually with your cavernoma. I've tried to show how the cavernoma are generated and the sort of ways in which you can get different appearances by different modes. But just a very quick finish about permeability. Now, what permeability is the way in which fluid can go over a membrane. I mean, the membrane I talked about once before was where you have a coffee with a membrane, and you pour coffee across a membrane, and the coffee leaks through all the coffee grounds into the pot below. And the permeability is the amount of liquid you get pouring through every minute for the size of that membrane. Now, you can measure the permeability of cavernoma. Here's a T2 image, here's a SWI image, but here's an image of the same person taken on the same afternoon showing permeability. And the permeability image is formed by taking two images of your brain, one a T2 image like this, but then you take gadolinium, inject it with that gadolinium, and take another one of a gadolinium image. And because gadolinium leaches out through the structures, by comparing what it was like originally with what it's like after 10 minutes with gadolinium exposure, and then you can color it in the computer to show how rapidly the blood is flowing out of that cavernoma into the main tissue. And here is a scale that is measured in milliliters of leakage per 100 grams of cavernoma. Whoever has heard of a 100-gram cavernoma per minute? So you've got to convert those numbers to what they will be in reality. So it's per 100 grams. How heavy is a cavernoma? Excuse me. This cavernoma is around about a centimetre in diameter. It's spherical, roughly, so its volume is around about 0.5 milliliter, and that means it weighs about 0.5 gram. So instead of having milliliters per 100 grams, you've got to get milliliters per 0.5 gram. That's a factor of 200 less. So we've got the scale, and this light blue structure is around about 0.4. This is 2 milliliters per 100 grams per minute. This is about 0.4 milliliters per 100 grams per minute. This red part in the middle is rather higher leakage. And if we convert that, the flow is 0.4 milliliters per 100 grams. That's 0.4 divided 0.5 grams for this cavernoma. And that, you can work it out if you wish later, is around about 2 thousandths of a milliliter per minute. That's 12 a tenth of a milliliter per hour, and it's roughly speaking 3 milliliters a day. Now, a teaspoon holds 5 milliliters if you're conventional, and that means that the amount of blood that's leached out of this cavernoma per day is roughly 1/2 teaspoon. Now, is that useful to know? Well, I think it's quite fun to know how much blood is leaking out, but of course it's useful if you're going to want to know whether there's a massive bleed or not. You could do this kind of experiment. It's not usually done, that would be fairly unusual, but it can be done in the hospital lab if you need to know that. But I thought it would just be fun to show you. As a matter of interest, there's leakage throughout the brain. This shows the grey and the white matter somewhere down here. So there's a very dilute leakage, if you like, of blood in the brain altogether. So that's the end.